Module 10. Today we're going to create this rack and pinion mechanical mate for Lab10A. We're going to download these files, this Gear 1 rack and pinion mates. So I'm going to select that, and that. And then I'm going to open up the gear. And I'm going to open up the rack. And I'm going to open the rack and pinion mates assembly. Once I have those files open, we're going to take a look at the chapter from the textbook. And we're going to be using the rack and pinion advanced mate. And so we've opened up the file folders and we have the gear and the pinion. And we're going to add a standard mate to these two parts with the front planes. To do that, we'll select the paper clip and we'll create a mate that's going to be coincident, and then we'll create a mate that's going to be parallel. So we'll click on the mate, and then we'll click on this tree here. And if you click on the arrows, you can expand out the properties of that, and we'll click on the front plane and populate that into the mate selection, and then we'll expand the gear, and we'll also select the front plane. And so we'll have these two populated, and it's going to say coincident, which means that they're both going to be lined up. And then we'll green check mark that. And we can then repeat the same process between those two front planes. So we'll select the front plane, and then we'll select the front plane for the gear, and then we'll select parallel. And then we'll green check mark that. And so now the planes are parallel and coincident, which means that everything's lined up along that edge. If we go back to the textbook, it wants us to be able to understand how to suppress a mate, because what happens is you'll oftentimes find that by removing certain degrees of freedom from the part, you'll cause some interference or some other problems. And so what we'll do is we'll expand out our mates and we'll right click and we'll suppress the parallel mate. And then we'll go through and we'll add a mechanical mate for the rack and pinion. I like to keep things kind of tidy, so over here on the left hand side I'm going to unexpand those and then expand out the mate, and then I'll right click on the parallel mate and I'll select suppress mate. With that, I'm going to go back to the mates icon, and then I'm going to go and select a mechanical mate. I'm going to choose rack and pinion, and then I'm going to zoom in on the part here. And for the rack, I'm going to select this line right here. And then for the pinion, I'm going to select this line or this circular geometry right here. And then we are going to go ahead and just apply this. We'll wind up tweaking it a little bit. So we'll hit the green check mark and hit the green check mark again, and then let's try it. And so we can see that the gear is moving backwards relative to the rack. And so what we need to do is to fix that, and what we can do is we can right click on our mate and we can edit that feature, and then we can select reverse. And by reversing it, it's going to change the way that those gear and pinion react. It kind of moved it way to the side, but that's all right. As we move it back in here, it'll come back in and line up. And then as we look at it, we have another problem. It's opposite of what we want. So they're interfering with each other. And so in order to fix that, what we need to do is we need to suppress the rack and pinion mate and then just slide the rack over slightly. So I'm going to OK this and kind of bail out. I'm going to hit the space bar and go to a normal view so I can see them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the rack and pinion mate and I'll suppress it. And then I'll go back over here to the assembly and I will move the rack until it appears to be in the proper orientation. I'll green check mark that. I'll right click on the rack and pinion and I'll unsuppress it. And then it should work just fine. And so if we come back here and we move that, now our rack and pinion mate is working the way it's supposed to do. And they tell you that in the textbook here as well, but it's a little bit hard until you actually figure out how that actually works. We'll save this assembly as Lab10A. To save the assembly, what we'll do is we'll say File, Save As. We'll rebuild and save the document, and then I'm going to save this into a directory that I created on my desktop in my Solidworks 2020, and I'm going to create a module 10. And I'm going to save this as JC, or your initials, dash Lab10A. And then lastly, as we turn in these files, or when you share these files with somebody else, you need to use the pack and go feature of the assemblies so that the parametric relations stay in place. So we're going to go save as, or actually we're going to say pack and go, and we're going to choose save to a zip file, and then you can browse for the location of that. I'm going to save mine to my 10 directory for Lab 10, and I'll say Lab10A, and this will be a zip file, so it will have a different file extension, and we'll hit save. And what that'll do is it'll compress those files and keep the links. And so when we go to turn in this file to the D2L assignments folder, we can come over here to the assignments folder, and then we can go to module 10, and you can submit the zip file to your module 10. That way when I open it, the files won't get disconnected. That completes the lab exercise for module 10A.